You ever realize halfway through a book, a movie, or a game that the main character might actually be full of garbage? Because that's basically what the Assassination of Brangwain Spurge does the entire time. This book looks like a goofy fantasy story about elves and goblins, but it's actually about propaganda, prejudice, manipulated history, and how people judge each other before even understanding them, which honestly feels very relevant right now. One of the biggest themes in the novel is the unreliable narrative. The story constantly shows how history and storytelling becomes biased depending on who's telling it. Both the elves and the goblins think they're the good guys, and both sides twist history to make themselves look better. Throughout the journey, both sides describe war and historical events completely different depending on who is telling the story. The elves describe goblins as savage monsters, while goblins describe elves as violent conquerors. The reader is stuck in the middle trying to figure out who is actually telling the truth. The illustrations act as a major plot device because they show the world through Spurge's biased perspective rather than objective reality. At the beginning of the book, Spurge sees Werfel, the goblin helping him throughout the journey, as this disgusting and terrifying creature. The illustrations exaggerate Werfel's appearance to reflect Spurge's fear and prejudice. But as the story progresses and the two spend more time together, the illustrations of Werfel slowly become more and more humanized. The change reflects how Spurge slowly stops viewing goblins as stereotypes and starts seeing Werfel as an actual person. The illustrations force the reader to experience Spurge's bias firsthand, making us realize how easily perspective can distort reality. As a reader, you're constantly forced to question what's actually true. One quote that really represents this idea is, "Elf and Goblin, we all have pointy ears, so true." The quote sounds funny at first, but it actually represents one of the biggest ideas in the novel. Elves and goblins are way more similar than they think. The hatred between them mostly comes from stereotypes, fear, and generations of biased stories passed down over time. This connects to the real world because people are constantly influenced by misinformation, propaganda, and one-sided perspectives, especially online. Social media especially makes it easy for people to only hear opinions that already match what they already believe. The novel shows how dangerous that can become because once groups stop trying to understand each other, prejudice grows even stronger. The novel connects to the modern world because misinformation, political division, and prejudice still shape the way people view each other today. But the book isn't just about propaganda and government, it's also about everyday assumptions people make to each other. One reason this theme really stood out to me is because I've done this myself. There was someone I assumed hated me because of the way they looked at me and talked to me, but once I actually started talking to them, they're actually nice and they didn't hate my guts and want to kill me. They're actually pretty chill, and we eventually became friends. That's basically what happens throughout this novel. Spurge starts out deeply distrusting goblins and is ungrateful towards Werfel, even after Werfel risks his own safety to help him escape and survive. During their journey together, they continue arguing and misunderstanding each other, but they slowly begin recognizing each other as actual people instead of enemies. Even though they come from completely different cultures and were raised to fear each other, they still become unlikely friends by the end of the novel. Their friendship becomes one of the most important parts of the story because it proves that direct understanding between people is stronger than the fear created by propaganda and stereotypes. Another important quote in the novel is, "Just because you're useful to the wealthy doesn't mean they'll reward you. It just means they'll use you." This quote connects to another major theme in the novel: power and manipulation. The novel suggests that prejudice is not always accidental. Throughout the story, the Elf King encourages distrust and conflict instead of peace because keeping elves and goblins divided helps maintain his political power. While ordinary goblins suffer from fear, violence, and mistrust, the Elf King continues benefiting from the conflict. The end of the novel especially reinforces this idea because the conflict ultimately destroys both sides. During the climax, both the Elf King and Gog, the Goblin leader, are killed alongside their armies in a massive black hole explosion caused by the gemstone Spurge was originally supposed to deliver as a diplomatic gift. Instead of creating peace, the leader's obsessions with power and distrust leads to the destruction for everyone involved. That makes this quote especially important because it shows how people in control care more about usefulness and power rather than actual loyalty and fairness. At first, the Assassination of Brangwain Spurge feels completely goofy, chaotic, and honestly kind of ridiculous. But underneath all the humor, the novel is asking an important question.
This question that I'm about to ask you, who wants a taco?
How much of what we believe about other people is actually true? That's why this book still matters outside of fantasy, because even though it's about elves and goblins, it's actually about us.